Okay.
Welcome. Kevin and I are very excited to welcome Paul Hobcraft, innovation strategist, ecosystem architect, and self-described innovation journeyman, again to one of our webinars. Paul has spent over 20 years advancing innovation in all its forms, from global turnaround to mentoring abroad. Across a range of businesses and government organizations, he brings hard insights into what actually makes ecosystems work and where they can break down. So today, let's go straight to the core. We decided to focus on why orchestration consistently outperforms collaboration, highlighting the behaviors, the interfaces, the incentives that activate ecosystems rather than stall them.
Absolutely. And today's format will be Bob and I, we decided to try something different, something new. Our webinar will last longer than usual, 50 to 60 minutes. If you can make it, don't worry, the replay will be available to you. And we just want to make sure that we have the space that we can have a conversation, because I think that we need to dive deeper in what Paul is going to present us. And but we want to make sure that you have the space for your we have the space for your questions. So please post your questions in the comments, and we will go along. We have today, together with Paul, we have identified 5 topics we would like to approach and to discuss together. And Bob is going to start.
Thank you. So, Paul, the integrated interconnected business ecosystem, or the IIBE, the mindset. Why reframe how we compete? So, what are the core challenges in today's business landscape actually that led to this framework, this mindset?
I think we have to look at it in a number of different ways, Bob. The world, I think, is in constant motion. And because of that, you're getting a number of different things happening. You're getting a very clear structural shift taking place, which is that, the politics, the tensions are all causing a change in how we need to think. So it's getting more dynamic and less static, less predictable, number one. Number two, there's an operating shift taking place where we are losing more control individually and within organizations. And what we've got to try to do is work through what I think is a coherent stage, and that I think comes from ecosystems. My 2 other points that start this particular segment is the capability and maturity gap is widening, is changing. We're losing more people. We've got lots more shortfalls in professional capabilities. They're getting more specialized. It's creating more and more gaps and problems going forward. And I think the last point of why I think ecosystems is becoming significantly important is there is a risk framework beginning to really occur in the world, which is there's beginning to talk about a lot more bubbles, doing nothing. How are we going to align ourselves? Is it going to break down? So you've got that, let's say, is the context of why reframe what we are doing now. I think the other point is that business itself is actually in real crisis. It's staying very, very much in the last century thinking of we are independent, we can produce our own things, we can actually be good enough for what the consumer wants in the market. They're not. It is changing. It is becoming far more complex for us to find solutions. And the only way we can find those solutions is actually start coordinating, collaborating, and having co-creation. So I think that's the framework behind why I think we need to reframe. I think ecosystems themselves are actually quite overwhelming when you get into them. I've been overwhelmed in getting into it myself. They are complex. What we're doing is we're challenging everything in people's relationships, their independences, the flow of how they've been running their traditional organization models. These are designs that struggle when you start talking ecosystems. So we need to break this complexity into what I call structured layers. And what I'd like you to do, if you don't mind, is put up the framework, please, if that's okay. Right. Now, well, big framework, lots of issues. I'm going to make it very simple, very quick. There is the horizontal, which is the bottom part of it, and there is the verticals. The horizontal is where you start in what's the purpose of actually thinking about ecosystem? What's the purpose of actually building an ecosystem system? You go a shared vision, because ecosystems, if you are going to move away from linear ones, which is where a lot of people are today, what I mean by that is I have a supply chain linear system where I've worked with one guy or two guys and they supply me in their goods and the materials. If we want to move out into a far more networked environment, we've got to start thinking in ecosystems. So purpose becomes number one. To achieve anything in collaboration, you've got to have good relationships. You've got to build trust. So point two, point three is, okay, you've got relationships, you've got purpose. What is the value creation? There's no point in coming out with something that's extremely incremental on what you're currently doing, because the cost of transformation into some form of ecosystem is a lengthy process. It can be a very disruptive process, and it can also mean that you've got to have something a little bit different, a little bit more special than what you've got. So value creation becomes quite important. What breaks down in any system when you're moving outside your own organization is governance. And governance becomes extremely important. It's the place where you have trust. It's the place where you can actually build, coordinate, collaborate, and resolve, in particular, issues that do come up. And they come up pretty hard and pretty quickly. And the last thing is, you can't run an ecosystem without it being on a really robust technology-enabled system. And one can go into all of what that means. So that's my horizontal layer. My vertical layer is basically how you see your companies today, which is today you have got innovation people working. You've got either an entrepreneurial system in place, or you collaborate with startups on it. And thirdly, you've got a business platform underneath it. So you've got an ecosystem currently running in your organization that does innovation, does entrepreneurship, and does a business structure. Then on the other side, you have an overall framing, which is an enterprise itself is an ecosystem. And then you've got an enterprise to enterprise, which becomes the gateway into a greater collaboration, a greater ability to form partnerships and be able to form stronger ways of taking forward ideas and concepts. And the last part of this is the interconnected organization. That is really the one where you're working the whole of this constantly. You continually have it as a revolving wheel, a dynamic wheel that keeps moving. What I haven't spoken about is this one in the middle. And it's this one in the middle, dynamic ecosystems. Everybody says, well, I ain't got that in the company. We have, but my whole building out of this ecosystem framework is coming from this central point. dynamic ecosystems. And this is rather, I would argue, a new management discipline that we could go in at a later stage. But look, I've talked about that a bit longer than I would like to, but I hope that answers your first framing.
For sure, it's very clear that things are moving around continuously. There's a lot of motion happening. Everything is less predictable, less controlled by just as an organization. You also mentioned that from value chain, from a very linear way to thinking more in a networked way. There are more bubbles. Things become more complex. We are more specializing, so there start to be more gaps, etc. So it feels like traditional strategy and innovation models no longer are sufficient. Is that correct, Paul, then, in that perspective, that I make that interpretation?
And I think we've already got them in place in many, many situations. When I was been formulating this over the last 2 years nearly, I took a look at saying, well, who are the pioneers of this? Who are the people that are actually doing this successfully? A really standout one for anybody is Salesforce. Salesforce has been on something like a 12-year journey to turn their CRM business into an ecosystem of collaborators. And they have done that in an amazing way of working through what they needed to adjust and change their own ecosystem. Another one I looked at was at Alibaba, which I think is one of the most outstanding ecosystems. Another one was a bank, DBS in Singapore, which has an exceptionally high level of ecosystem coordination going on within its organization. Then I moved down, looked at industrial ones. I looked at John Deere, I looked at Siemens, I looked at Schneider. All of these are running ecosystems, not with my framework, but they are running ecosystems because they've seen the evolving way that we've got to manage in business today. But there's a big difference. It's taken some of these companies 10, 15 years to get to this point of where we are today. 5 years, 6 years. If you take my framework, I can get you a company there within about 2 years. So it's a matter of learning from what others have done, recognizing where they've made risks or bad mistakes, or they've made very pioneering activities, and then bringing that together into this blueprint and this framework, but recognizing that the structure still was relatively internal to organizations and not where I would like it to start, with a very external viewpoint all the way through this framework.
Very interesting. And I understand from your framework, it also really makes it clear that it all relies on collaboration. But the collaboration by these companies, but you now mentioned, but it maybe can call focal company or something like that, like Salesforce, they try to find the right collaborators, partners, etc., in their ecosystem. So it feels like a bit more like orchestration, like being the conductor of a large orchestra. So what makes that fundamentally different than normal collaboration?
You've actually brought out the most perfect word that I would like you to have done, which is orchestration. It's where you start. We have, I think, a relatively fixed view of what an orchestrator is. It's like the conductor in front of a band, or in front of a whole sort of who's about to conduct the music, and he enables the sound to actually bring out the harmony. I wrote a lot about that conductor because that is where most of our current ecosystems have come from. We want to constrain, we want to contain, and we want to enable out the data to enable us to grow as a business, and everybody else around us benefits. I think that is an outdated concept. So the second part, besides dynamic ecosystems, is the orchestration part. We need to find a different way of managing how orchestrators work. And I don't think they are controllers. I don't think they are administrators. I think they are these people that basically go out and they encourage everybody else to form and to develop and to build in the natural way an ecosystem will build. We don't force a situation on them. We don't impose the discipline, which sometimes the orchestrator will do. We are actually asking of a changing environment for this orchestrating role, if you want to call it that. That becomes far. I did some work very recently on how dynamics and orchestration come together, and I've really got a great set of emerging ideas coming out of this. But I think the key point I want to say is we want coherence, not control. That's number one. We want to have shared pathways for people, not where one is determining the pathway only. It could well be they put the stakes in the ground, but everybody's got to say that's our pathway. That's what we want to go. We want to take from that pathway far more than possibly we currently doing. It brings orchestration and governance together in a much tighter situation. And there are 5 dynamic elements that I've identified for us to help this orchestration quickly. It's mapping and diagnostics is number 1. Number 2, it's connectivity and alignment. Number 3, it's the government and decision flow. Number 4, it's learning and intelligence. And number 5, it's technology enablement. Now, I don't want to climb into those, but what I'm saying, it's not management we require out of orchestrators. We need a different type of role. And I think that will open up. And let me give you a classic example. Siemens, they orchestrate in a way that you buy their data solutions, you buy their machinery and whatever else. They are slowly encouraging partners to actually contribute into that by offering their ideas, their solutions, and Siemens will then provide the resources to help build that up, and it will go onto their platform as an offering for a greater number of people. That's quite a slow process. And it's a slow process because Siemens is a cautious company, but it's a trusting company, and it doesn't want to violate a number of those points. But we need to accelerate. And because we have got a number of our thinking, I think, a little bit linear still, we are not most probably accelerating as fast as we should do what Siemens could do. Will Siemens ever collaborate with Schneider Electric? Will Siemens ever collaborate with Emerson? They should, because those will accelerate far more innovation, far more development, far more ability to actually add better value into what people can do and will be able to do with their projects or whatever they do.
I like very much the way you framed it about the collaboration as understanding how we need to reframe, have a look at how we can reframe, how we compete. Even the word compete, is it still, does it still need to stay
No.
a la Michael Porter so much, in that we are rivals? But you also said it was about your approach. What you saw is to learn from others and how kind of leapfrog from a time perspective, bring more the external perspective within the ecosystem to build it. It's maybe a good timing also to talk about engineering ecosystems. What are the successes, how to make it happen, and how to avoid failure. So my first question would be, what patterns typically cause ecosystems to succeed or to collapse?
Ecosystems don't fail because the idea was wrong. They fail because the conditions weren't designed properly. Think about that for number one. Number two, and what that opens up, by the way, is to say, how do you study success patterns? How do you actually see what collapse patterns were all about? What is the orchestration gaps? And what were the misaligned incentives? You begin to actually, by reframing and saying, the idea was wrong, or it was too early, too late, whatever the case is, you're saying, no, it was the conditions we were thinking through from a design. That's number one triggering point I would like to put to you. The second one is coming down to, I know one of your questions you're going to be asking there, if you don't mind me jumping in, is to say reverse engineering an ecosystem exposes the invisible architecture of value, power, and dependency. Now, I did some amazing work for me, August of this year. I was asked to write a chapter for a book that's coming out next year on ecosystem management. And they gave me the chapter of operations. I can even say the word, doing the operations. How would it run as an operational system? And I sat there and I thought, now I can turn out a boring old one on this, which is supposed to be there already. And I sat and I thought, and there was a couple of things that really hit me, was what actually triggers an ecosystem? And I began to think about this, and I said, well, usually it's a regulation change, triggers. It could be one individual company actually sees an amazing change taking place in a customer relationships, let's say. Could be the industrial revolution 4.0. Each of these triggers change. So if one can study triggers, one gets quite interesting. So I then started looking at all of these universal triggers that I sort of came out with. And then I started to look at this reverse engineering theory. And I've done reverse engineering a little bit way back in my life, and I said, right, if one looks back at Salesforce, that can give me a good benchmark of what they've done to help me do reverse engineering. So I went through each of these companies, drawing out, where they had failure, where they made acquisition, where they identified the need to improve their ecosystem, where they needed to open up the network. And you saw these patterns shaping over the period of years that they were managing this. Same with Alibaba. Alibaba said, we've got a delivery system. Oh, we can make this a lot better. We need to have a bank to finance the delivery system. And you begin to see how each of these guys have actually evolved their ecosystem. That really is a reverse engineering type theory. So you can get risks identified, you can get their maturity levels, you can get their, and then you start asking AI a lot of intelligent questions. Is how much money did they spend on this? What was the management's feeling about doing ecosystems, and were they progressing to the way they wanted them? Has the vision changed? So you ask a structured set of systems, and it will again feed back into a formatting in your mind of reversing the engineering. Now, I believe that has now got to a pretty successful point. I've trialed that with about 6 or 7 companies, and what it gave me was maturity levels. It gave me where they are within their actual ecosystem, and I started to be able to grade. So I could say that Siemens was at level 4, Salesforce was at level 5, because of what they had actually done. But they were different. Each ecosystem was different. But because we'd found the common universal denominators, we could apply this lens. ABN AMRO is in the third tier, not in the fourth tier, not in the fifth tier. It has got a lot of fundamental things that could make it a really strong ecosystem player, for example. But it's lagging its two other major Dutch banks, because the next thing I did is I did a comparison lens. So I said, give me a lens for banks in the Netherlands, or give me a lens of banks across the world, or give me a lens for industrial companies like GE, Honeywell, Emerson, Schneider, and compare them. And I'd like you to compare where you see they've made progress, not from you're doing it wrong, but actually highlighting where they could go and improve and what their gaps were. So this whole re-engineering one became a very exciting part of how one can build for success and for failure.
Excellent. So you were already stepping into the area, the field of testing, probing, seeing what works and what less. What role does the IIB dynamics play in shifting from theory into action?
That's a good one, because clearly, when you look at that frame that you put up, it's a fairly static frame, it looks like, and it's not. It's what's underneath it. But what I needed to do was obviously really commercialize this whole frame. And so I've sat about and looked and said, okay, I've got now a triggering point, understanding that I could commercialize with people. I've got what I call a reality mapping tool, which gives people the point of, people say, oh yeah, I want to get into ecosystems. How do I do it? Well, not a matter of how you do it. Where's your reality? Where are you actually at this moment of time? Let's do some reality mapping for you to be able to then to recognize what this means internally, or what this means from a need to have a network around you. I then said, well, I need to keep operationalizing this. So I focus very significantly on the front end, like front end of innovation. It's the front end of ecosystems. And I've now built a number of self-diagnostics, which I can send to a company. I say, my hands are clean. I know nothing. And you have a look through that prompting mechanism and confirm to me or not whether you think this is a realistic feedback coming from public information, not from internal company information, that says, I am at this point. That's a very important point, that when you get these prompts, ownership takes place, number one. And that ownership comes in the fact of, you can then get into a much more detailed evaluation. And that's what I've been developing. So the front end has got pattern recognition, missed opportunities, reality mapping, intelligence fabric, maturity pathways, coherent tests. It just gets bigger and bigger. And I've got that through prompts, individual prompts, or I can produce diagnostics from the work that I've been doing and building up. So I'm commercializing the front end. It gives everybody a greater ability to come into purpose, yes, which is that key point on my map. It brings out the dynamic tensions also within that map of what's wrong, what's right, where can we see opportunity. All those things are sort of there. And I did an audit the other day for myself, because once every 3 months I do an audit, and I do an audit on myself with actually ChatGPT, Google Gemini, and Claude, and now Perplexity. Every one of them gives me a different feedback on my audit from its own perspective. And What that gives me, though, is an ability to say, okay, my next stage on this is I've got to build a lot more tools. And I've got tools now for all sorts of recognition, all the way through developing an ecosystem from purpose through to technology enablement, through to relationships, through to orchestration.
Excellent. Well, apparently, we lost Bob. Let me
Yeah.
see. But I wanted to show Michael, and thank you for your comments so far. With regard to the reverse engineering, what he tried to do, and I love that because you know that I'm also very active myself on with sustainability and circularity mostly. And I think it's a wonderful approach. I mean, Michael, thank you so much for your comment. And so, Bob, we were waiting for you. So I'm passing on to you now.
We're at the dual layered ecosystem model.
Bob, can you hear us? Apparently, until let me maybe start asking the first question until Bob's apparently seems to have a technical problem. And are you here? So you can go ahead. No, we don't.
You're muted.
You.
We have to say that once, don't we, in every webinar, really. It's good.
Yeah, once it needs to happen. So
it's got to, yeah.
So let me ask you the first question. What are the two, on the dual layered ecosystem model, what are the two critical layers in IIBE and why must they be integrated?
As I explained when we went through the visual you kindly put up, we have domains. Domains are innovation, entrepreneurs, business, etc. They're domains, but those domains can also become, we could map domains of industry. We could map domains of other areas as well to say, you know, for instance, if you take Siemens Energy, they have grids. That's arguably a domain. So we could actually evolve our ecosystem and look at the domain of grids. But so you've got the domains, which is number one, and then it runs on the enablers, which is this horizontal platform. So you've got the how and why, which is the bottom one here, and then you've got the what and where, which is the verticals. So verticals are the domains, and the how and what are your enablers, to answer your question.
And Paul, how do the vertical domains and the horizontal enablers then interact? Can you explain a little bit more about that point?
Yeah. The horizontal domain is feeding the vertical domain. I mean, if you say my purpose as a bank is to do this, this, and this, what you've got to do is the organization or the organizations that are in your network have to then start working through these domains to be able to deliver that purpose. The relationships of all the people that are involved in those domains also then map back to purpose, but also you allocate and you design how those relationships are going to take place. So you begin to then build, you take relationships up, because you've not got relationships of just people, you've got relationships of these ecosystems. So you've got to actually make sure that works. And then each time you're testing value creation. Are our innovation ecosystem people, are they actually delivering value creation? Are they pulling it out the way that it should be seen by the network? If not, you will go back and you will remap your value creation because it's not working. because it won't work, or it needs to be refocused on and accelerated. So you will get the mechanisms and the whole distributing values continually to evolve. So all of these are dynamic. And finally, you will get into your governments. If we don't get the domains crossing over and collaborating internally in the company and externally in the company, your governance will fall down. You need to make sure your governance is dynamic. It's constantly moving into those domains and drawing out through dynamic ecosystems how and what they should be doing. And what the dynamic ecosystems are, they're the intelligence lens. They're the lens that says to people inside or outside, feed me this information because I need to pass it across to the internal people, explore it with the external ideas we've got. So governance coupled with orchestration, coupled with dynamics and intelligence, you're really getting at the heart of how this whole thing begins to work. And of course, technology is so essential, because if people don't bother to record it, don't bother to send it over to anybody, don't talk to each other on a regular basis, etc., 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 and that means it's got to be dynamic, it's got to be constant, and that means it's got to, again, tap into each of these ecosystems. Innovation people will have a set of technologies which will be different from the people within business. But we know that because that's what our businesses currently have today. But we've got to harmonize a lot of those. And that's quite a tough task, is to harmonize it, because, as you know, technology doesn't talk to each other very easily, particularly if you're bringing a number of companies together. And you've got to find ways to do that.
Yeah, so I hear you actually saying remapping, dynamics. So it's really is important to be adaptable. And that is basically key to be successful, if I may use that statement.
Yes, yes, of course, yes.
Okay, clear.
So, you know, I put myself back in the shoes of a CEO, of corporate CEO, and it's quite, what shall I do, to go from the idea to the execution, and what specific steps, but not only as a CEO, but as the overall sponsor of change and adaptation. What can leaders take to activate the IIB? Because you said earlier you've developed a prompt, that can help companies also to see where they are. How could we make it happen? Because you said it rightly at the very beginning. It requires a change of management of how we were conducting business up to now. So it's how do you do that?
Not easily is the starting point. What you've got to do is, like you, wearing sometimes your CEO shoes, we all get sometimes totally entranced, engaged, activated in our own ways, because we're seeing things as a CEO differently than somebody lower down the organization. But each person that comes into the ecosystem has got to find engagement, has got to find their ability to relate, because the CEO's got 100 more, most probably tougher decisions to make. Can I afford to do it? Why should I be doing it and risk maybe some of my own business I've got today? Do I lose my IP and share my IP with other people? So it's got a range of questions that will automatically come bubbling up. The more that come bubbling up, the better. Simply because the more you can get answers to those questions, the more he's going to be engaged, and the more he's going to be convinced that this is actually a way forward for his business. He can get better growth, he can get better impact, he can get better outcomes, because he's getting his organization far more able to tap into other people's knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
expose themselves to new market activities, have a greater diversity of opinions in discussions. He can actually look around his table and all the other tables of his partners and say, how do we collaboratively build this out in a different way than we could have done individually? Because individually, we would have built a far more constrained solution than I think what we've got possible with our ecosystem solution. Take Salesforce as an example and how they evolved over this. If it hadn't been for the CEO driving this forward with an absolute passion and belief, if it hadn't been for Siemens CEO and their chief technical officer driving through their ecosystems, everywhere you see successful ecosystems, you do see a very strong hand of the CEO. But you then have to have the board, then you have to have the people that are going to manage this and also feed into this. Each has got a layer, each has got a structure that you've got to design through dialogues, through workshops, through conversations, the ability to bring out people's understanding that they can move in a different way. But the key is mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And mindset is so critical to make people sit up and realize this is going to change that for them. And that's uncomfortable.
Absolutely, but I think it's a beautiful bridge to the mindset. So, and you were talking about the strong hand. What are the roles, the incentives, or the behaviors that need to shift to have a success?
I think if you ask a lot of people within organizations, how frustrated are you? What is it you're failing to get through?
Mm-hmm.
You're going to get a list that's most probably as long as my arm, your arm, and Bob's arm all together. I mean, it is incredible. You know, we still talk about silos. We still talk about, I have a project, they have a project. We never really sit down and talk about the project. Or my manager is on a completely different wavelength to myself. Or his manager has got favorites. And you go through. I can't change those as human. They're part of our human makeup. But what we can do is we can start fusing into human thinking, intelligence that's coming from AI. And so it becomes less of a threat and an independence. It actually comes in and we ask a question. Okay, I'm in a siloed environment. I've got so and so and so and so. I'm having real difficulties. Help me with this. And it will come back with a very helpful set of solutions. If the company is open-minded or going to be a more open-minded company, if it believes that silos is one of its constraints, it might get very interested in what AI says, but it also then get very interested in the other people who are sitting around that table who say, well, that's my problem as well.
Yeah.
And suddenly you're opening up possibility.
And listening to what you were saying, all of a sudden I was thinking roles are constraining us. I mean, they are necessary in certain ways, but you were saying at the very beginning and also throughout all the discussion we have so far about the importance of collaborations. So it moves away from roles to collaborations, and which is, I must say, a aha moment of mine that I'm taking with me. Because I've never thought of roles. I mean, no, I always thought of roles about clarifying the situation, but it kinds of puts us also in silos. So it is about maybe to define what the roles are in the future, that they're more collaborative and more open for exchange, allow exchange. Um, and well, this would lead us to another discussion. I have, because I spoke about sustainability and purpose, and Michael also made some comments in here. How can sustainability and purpose be embedded into ecosystem-driven value?
I think the more people collaborate,
Mm-hmm.
the more people cooperate, the more value they see across a whole chain of immediate value and long-term value. If you look at ecosystems as only going to be short-term, it's not going to yield you the return. I think when you start stretching people's minds, and I pull out one that haven't got it in front of me, is the Battery Alliance that took place, for instance, is an extremely good example of where somebody said, we're all producing a different type of battery, we're all producing a different type of thing. Hey, this is crazy. Let us rethink this. Now, getting people around the table that were competitors,
yes,
and changing them into collaborators is because they all recognize that they could get better scale, better efficiency, better opportunity, and through more and more competitive advantage of even a better shape than previously they'd got. So it is going to be through more recognition that we've got to go through more of these alliances that I think we will get closer to then. Well, hang on a minute. We've now got a good battery. We've now got a battery that actually is scaling. It's up to a certain size. How are we going to, how are we going to re-engineer that battery? How are we going to actually reprocess it? So you pull in, don't you, another part of your network people, which are the ones that actually can do that, breaking down the battery into the parts. It could well be that the parts weren't good enough to be able to do that end of life part. That raises itself in an environment where you actually are working for a bigger, longer term, broader ecosystem solution. Batteries is an example. Grid is another example. Hydrogen is another example. You can go on and on and on, where alliances will move forward. The question I think you're asking there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And Peter Evans was also talking about collaborative circularity, also in the circularity area, where you bring all the different partners together to be able to scale, what can be done and achieved. Absolutely. Absolutely.
I did a curious, silly little piece of work the other day. There's always a myth that you can't have scale, speed, and scope. It's a bit like the triangle. You can only have the two parts of the bottom. You can never get all three. And I was looking at this, and again, I think one can find a way through the IIBE that you will certainly be able to achieve all three. But I'm not going to go too much into that. But I really thought it was quite fun because it takes away a bit of the myth that's in innovation. Oh, you can't have scope, if you haven't got this and that. I think we can do something on that. But my final point, if I may, to pick up on your point, the other way of looking at how people react, how people would want to change, is I try to take away the silo thinking and the budget constraints and the people constraints. And I said, what are people suffering from today in today's organization? What are their pain points? And their pain points are fatigue. It is delusion. It is gaps either within their own understanding, within their own capabilities, within their own skills. It's about the ability to say, I don't feel we've got the adaptability that we could do. I don't think we've got the connections into all the people we should do. If one looks at a universal set of problems, which are besides the historic ones that we've talked about, but we look at what people are trying to do,
Yes.
I think one can get closer to actually, again, make change, because ecosystems can give you a change because they're giving you a much broader picture, a much bigger framework. They're giving you the opportunity to actually collaborate, to co-create. You raise up your level of enthusiasm because you see a bigger picture, you see a bigger solution to go find. And the greater you can orchestrate that, you'll lift up all boats, as they say.
Right, right. And before, as I'm looking at the time, I mean, Bob and Paul, there is a, let me show you, there is a comment which I thought is, how can we, how can we make it even easier for people who are starting? I mean, we know, I mean, I think I know, I have a pretty good understanding how ecosystems work, what the dynamics are, what the pitfalls are, etc. But I'm learning a lot from you and also your framework. And when someone young and fresh is coming in, how can we frame the next question in such a way that also for someone who is only stepping into the topic of ecosystems now, that they can take something with them?
I think the first thing maybe we could go and do is go and visit a forest. And we stand in the middle of the forest and we start talking ecosystems. What makes that ecosystem function? Because when you get a natural ecosystem, and part of what I've done and looked at is natural ecosystems, you begin to recognize everything. You know, one can talk to anybody of any age and determine how they see an ecosystem in their own way. And then you build that ecosystem understanding in their language, and you build it out into maybe more of a business language, or to be able to try to get them to relate to, there are important players, there are, you know, less so players, they are people that are there who come in, come out. So I think going into a forest or looking at another couple of natural ecosystems is not a bad place to start to introduce, because the concepts are not new. The concepts are living around us every minute of the day. What we're trying to draw out is a better understanding of those concepts to apply them to business.
So, Bob, given the time, you have one or two questions to ask.
Oh,
Please.
I think I can only make it into one question then, because we talked a lot about alliances, and it's also something about networking with other companies. It's a lot to do with people,
Mhm.
having the right purpose to work together, to do collaboration, to have the right mindset. So there's a lot of human interaction with each other. But at the same time, I heard, Paul, you refer to artificial intelligence, which can be used as an independent advisor. I thought it was a very interesting point. So actually, I'm also thinking about how can artificial intelligence, or maybe even technology in general, then help or reshape this orchestration of working together, collaborating with other companies. How can that be beneficial?
I, what we need to do is we have to anchor human and AI together.
Mhm.
We're not doing a very good job of that at the moment. We are playing with projects. Go and have a look at a project, see if we can make it more efficient or more effective. And they do that through AI, and they get a limited amount of learning. What we've got to do by applying it through an ecosystem approach, we are saying that our engagement of the human and of AI needs a couple of things. It needs the orchestrator, who's able to see what each side is doing and to draw it out. So the biggest thing is intelligence. And we have to apply human intelligence and AI intelligence in this ecosystem, dynamic ecosystem, this orchestrated sort of point, to be able to say we're getting the best out of both. I mean, AI doesn't replace people, in my opinion. It doesn't replace orchestration. What it does is amplifies it. And that's where I think we should be going. We actually should be saying AI is our greatest friend because it helps us sharpen our minds, trigger new ideas, enable us to challenge it and feed it back, because it's one of the nicest things in the world. They don't shout at you too much, as sometimes the human does. It turns ecosystem dynamics into an intelligent framework or fabric. And that is where I think AI comes in.
Clear, very interesting. It's yeah, another support instead of another employee next to you, but it's much more having you in a broader mind and condense the information in a more effective way and maybe enlighten you in other ways. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Maybe, yeah, sorry, Catherine. Yes.
You know, the what I'm taking with me is really that we are so much at so many inflection points at the same time, that it is either we shut down or we allow ourselves to be curious again a little bit more, even more so, but in a genuine way, you know, not only to explore what are new potential market shares that we can gain against our competitors, but it is about really redefining how we approach business in general, I would say.
I feel a little bit, sometimes maybe I'm being a bit too cocky, a bit too sort of, I've got something here. But I believe
You too.
SAP changed the world with their ERP structure.
Mm-hmm.
I believe Salesforce has changed the world with their CRM structure.
Mm-hmm.
We think very differently. We collaborate, we build out on each of those are fundamental cores of our current business, and I think going forward, our future business. I believe this lens, this framework, can be another one of those really strong anchors in the ground. It can have an OS system, an operating system that is as strong and as powerful as ERP or CRM, because it will deliver the value aspects to be able to feed everything else. And I think we must stop once and for all, if I may finish with this, talking all the time about efficiency. Let's cut out X number of thousand people because we're going to become more efficient. I really think we're at a stage where we should be changing efficiency, and we should be talking into emergence. We should be emerging, saying, what have I got as a set of assets, and how am I going to emerge those into a completely new form and a new way? And that's what CRM did, and that's what ERP did. They brought out, and we actually got bigger structures because they were required. Okay, sometimes a bit cumbersome, but they were required. And I think efficiency is a death bell, in my opinion, today, because it's being used for the wrong reason. You know, let's get rid of X thousands of people. I know this, whatever. And I got, just as a final point, I got quite angry when ABN AMRO came out with this statements this last week or two. I've been doing a lot of validation work on Dutch banks. I've been doing a lot of validation on ABM and where it sits. And I'm sure I'm going to have a conversation after this with Bob, for example. But I think they are making efficiency a scapegoat. I think they are casting forward 4 or 5 objectives of where they would like to go, but they don't have the structure in place to be able to do it.
Mhm.
And if they took an ecosystem thinking, they might have a much better chance of getting there. And all I can see, it's like my bank in the UK, Barclays, it just had a death of 1,000 cuts because in came consultants said, oh, if we cut out 50,000 here people, or we close down this part of the business, you're cutting out your ecosystem. You're cutting a root of a tree. You're cutting away some plants. You are actually shrinking your chance of survival unless you actually start reframing and rethinking yourself in a much broader context. I missed that coming out of the announcements of ABN, and that's what disappointed me. But that's my own little beef.
And I mean, you did a very compelling closing of our webinar. Also, with what you were saying before the ABN AMRO example, I think that it is about rethinking efficiency, and I love the word emergence that you brought up. And I would say we have now we have been on the air for 1 hour. I mean, thank you so much. Continue the work. We need people like you, Paul. I mean, seriously, good. I mean, really extraordinary work. And I'm taking a lot of seeds and deeds for me, and what to do, what not to do. And Paul and Bob, do you want to say something at the end?
No, I want to thank both of you, and especially Paul, of course, of sharing
Yes.
this information. Very much interested to find more details about the framework and actually how it can actually help to make a better value for many more people. That is very interesting. It's
Yes.
about survival, and I really loved also the comparison, of course, with the natural ecosystem. What you also say and just described from a company perspective, it is an ecosystem in itself. Yeah, if you cut, you maybe are cutting yourself and having the chance to grow. So those are interesting thoughts. Thank you for that.
And
Thank you for both. Thank you for both.
And I would say to the audience, whenever you want to reach out to Paul, he is a treasure of ideas and examples. So, I mean, reach out to him, and you
More
will
than
see-
welcome.
and Paul, you will see in the comments, Hojad, I hope I pronounce your first name correctly, has a question maybe that you can give him an answer, because he's very keen to learn more, and would love to start from a specific example. Maybe I'll let you continue to have the dialogue, and thank you again. And Paul, I mean, I think that Bob and I would be absolutely delighted to have you again in a few months.
Thank you.
For sure.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you to you all. I'm ending now the stream.